There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary, moments that are, in truth, the quiet turning of a key in a lock you never knew was there. For me, that moment wasn't a grand declaration or a cinematic swell of music. It was the weight of a human head in my lap, the soft, rhythmic puff of breath against the worn denim of my jeans, and the oppressive, beautiful silence of 3 o'clock in the morning. It was Julian, asleep on my couch again, his long frame folded into the limited space, one arm dangling just above the floorboards, his face turned inward toward me. This had become our ritual, an unspoken agreement forged in the crucible of his own recent heartbreak. But for me, it was something else entirely. It was a kind of exquisite torture, a nightly pilgrimage to a holy place where I was allowed to be near him in a way that daylight and conversation would never permit. I had learned the cartography of his sleep, the subtle twitch of his fingers as he drifted deeper, the way his brow would furrow and then smooth, the faint, almost imperceptible scent of chlorine from his afternoon practice that clung to his hair like a ghost. I was the keeper of these secrets, the silent archivist of his vulnerability, and it was a role I cherished with a fierce, protective terror. Because I knew, with the chilling certainty of someone who has spent years wanting something they cannot have, that this was a temporary state. It was a bubble, a fragile ecosystem of need and comfort that existed only within the four walls of my apartment. And one day, the sun would rise, and he would wake up, and the spell would be broken. He would be whole again, and he wouldn't need me, not like this. And the thought of that inevitable morning was a constant, low hum of anxiety beneath the profound peace of having him so close. We had met in the way that so many disparate orbits collide in the contained universe of a college campus. I was a quiet observer by nature and by trade, a photography student who found more truth in the interplay of light and shadow on a forgotten staircase than in the boisterous energy of a crowded lecture hall. Julian was the opposite of a shadow. He was pure kinetic energy, a creature of water and muscle and relentless forward motion. He was the star of the university swim team, a blur of sculpted shoulders and powerful kicks, his name a familiar echo in the natatorium and a frequent headline in the campus sports brief. Our worlds should never have intersected. He moved through life with an easy, sun-drenched confidence, surrounded by a constellation of friends and admirers, while I moved through the periphery, my camera a shield and a license to watch without participating. The bridge between our worlds was, improbably, a required art history course. I sat in the back, taking meticulous notes on chiaroscuro and the emotional weight of Renaissance portraiture. He sat in the front, ostensibly to see the slides better, but I suspected it was more about being in the professor's direct line of sight, a strategy to stay awake through lectures on Baroque architecture. He was an engineering major, fulfilling a humanities credit with the same grim determination he applied to a 500-meter freestyle. Our first real conversation happened over a broken projector. The professor was flustered, the class was restless, and I, having spent half my life tinkering with lenses and apertures, saw a problem I might actually be able to solve. I moved toward the front of the room, a quiet ghost in a sea of impatient sighs, and began fiddling with the focus ring. It was then that he spoke to me, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floor. "Know what you're doing?" he'd asked, not with skepticism, but with a genuine, almost childlike curiosity. I remember nodding, not trusting my voice, and feeling the heat of his gaze on the back of my neck. He smelled faintly of coffee and something clean, like fresh laundry. When I finally coaxed a clear image of a Caravaggio onto the screen, a wave of relieved applause rippled through the room. Julian had just grinned at me, a wide, honest grin that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. "You're a lifesaver, man," he'd said, and in that moment, I felt seen in a way I hadn't before. It was as if his light, for just a second, had found me in my comfortable shadows and decided I was worth illuminating. From there, a friendship bloomed, strange and unexpected. He was drawn to my quiet, I think, as a respite from the constant noise and pressure of his own life. My apartment, with its walls of books and the quiet chemical smell of my darkroom, became his sanctuary. He would show up after a grueling practice, his hair still damp, and collapse onto my worn-out sofa, talking about lap times and team dynamics and the intricate physics of fluid dynamics that governed his world. I, in turn, would listen. I listened as I edited photos, the rhythmic click of my mouse a soft counterpoint to his stories. I learned that his outward confidence was a carefully constructed facade, a necessary armor for the brutal world of competitive sports. Beneath it, he was thoughtful, surprisingly insecure about his academic abilities, and possessed a deep, unwavering loyalty to the people he cared about. He saw the world in absolutes, in wins and losses, in clear-cut goals and measurable progress. I saw the world in shades of gray, in nuances and captured moments, in the beauty of imperfection. We were a study in contrasts, yet somehow we fit. He grounded my ethereal tendencies, and I think, offered him a space where he didn't have to perform. He could just be. My feelings for him were a slow-developing photograph, an image that emerged gradually in the chemical bath of our late-night talks and shared silences. At first, I mistook it for deep admiration, the kind of platonic affection one feels for a truly good person. But then there were moments, small and seemingly insignificant, that would leave me breathless. The time he'd casually draped his arm over the back of my chair while watching me work, his fingers brushing my shoulder, sending a jolt of electricity through my entire system. Or the time we'd been caught in a downpour and huddled under a narrow awning, laughing, his body heat a tangible presence beside me, and all I could think about was how easy it would be to close the small distance between us. I began to see him not just as a friend, but as a collection of breathtaking details. The tiny scar above his right eyebrow, the way he chewed on his lower lip when he was concentrating, the constellation of freckles across his shoulders that were usually hidden by a shirt. I started taking pictures of him, not posed, but candid shots when he wasn't looking. Julian asleep on my couch, the afternoon light tracing the line of his jaw. Julian staring out my window, lost in thought, a mug of tea cradled in his big hands. My camera, which had always been my tool for objective observation, became a vessel for my secret, hopeless affection. I archived these feelings in silver gelatin prints, hiding them away in a box under my bed, a silent testament to a love that lived and breathed only in the dark. He had a girlfriend, of course, Sarah. She was bright and kind and a perfect match for the public version of Julian, driven, effervescent, and part of the same sunlit world he inhabited. I liked her genuinely. I had no reason not to. She was always warm and inclusive, never making me feel like the odd, quiet friend who didn't quite belong. But her presence was a constant, painful reminder of the unbridgeable chasm between my reality and my desires. When they were together, I would retreat into myself, becoming the quiet observer once more, my camera a convenient excuse to create distance. I would watch them interact, the easy intimacy of their shared glances, the casual touches, and a cold, heavy feeling would settle in my chest. It wasn't jealousy, not exactly. It was a more profound and hollow ache, a grief for something that had never been mine to lose. I mastered the art of the supportive friend, asking about their dates, feigning enthusiasm for their future plans, all while the unspoken truth was screaming inside me. I buried my feelings so deep they became a part of my foundation, a silent, load-bearing beam of my internal architecture. To risk the friendship, the one pure and true thing he gave me, for a confession that would only lead to awkwardness and ruin was unthinkable. So I stayed quiet. I watched, and I waited for a feeling I was sure would eventually fade. It never did. The shift began on a Tuesday in October. It was a day of relentless, weeping rain, the kind that seeps into your bones and turns the whole world a melancholy shade of gray. My phone buzzed with a text from him, which was unusual. Julian was a caller, not a texter. The message was stark, devoid of his usual cheerful slang. She ended it, that was all. 3 words that felt like a tectonic plate shifting deep beneath the surface of our lives. I replied instantly, asking if he was okay, if he needed anything. The 3 dots of his reply appeared, and disappeared for what felt like an hour before a second message came through. "Can I come over?" I didn't even have to answer. 20 minutes later, he was at my door, looking like a ship that had been torn from its moorings. His hair was plastered to his forehead, his clothes were soaked through, and his eyes, usually so bright and clear, were hollowed out, lost in a storm I couldn't see. He didn't say a word. He just walked past me, dripping rainwater onto my wooden floors, and collapsed onto the couch, the same couch that would later become our sanctuary. He curled into himself, facing the cushions, and for the first time since I'd known him, Julian, the pillar of strength and forward momentum, looked utterly and completely broken. I didn't press him for details. I just made him a cup of tea he didn't touch, draped a dry blanket over his shaking shoulders, and put on a quiet, atmospheric film with no discernible plot, something that would fill the silence without demanding attention. For hours, the only sounds in the room were the rain against the window pane, the soft drone of the movie's score, and the ragged, unsteady rhythm of his breathing. I sat in my usual armchair, pretending to edit photos on my laptop, but my focus was entirely on him. I was cataloging the slump of his shoulders, the tension in his neck, the way he clutched a cushion to his chest like a life raft. I felt a painful, wrenching empathy for him, a desperate desire to absorb his pain into myself. But underneath that, a traitorous, shameful little flicker of something else ignited. It was a dark and selfish thought that I immediately tried to extinguish. He was here, with me. In his moment of absolute devastation, he had come to me. The thought was both a comfort and a condemnation, and I hated myself for it. But it was there, a tiny, resilient weed pushing its way through the cracks in my carefully constructed platonic facade. That night was the first of many. He went home eventually, late, after the rain had stopped and the silence had stretched to its limit. But he was back the next night, and the one after that. His own apartment, the one he had shared with Sarah in all but name, had become a mausoleum of their shared memories. He couldn't bear to be there, so he came to mine. He never said it in so many words, but I understood. My space was neutral ground. It was a room that held no ghosts for him. It only held me. And so began the slow, imperceptible blurring of boundaries. He started leaving a change of clothes at my place, a toothbrush in a cup by the sink. He'd fall asleep on the couch watching a movie, and I would let him stay, covering him with a blanket and turning off the lights before retreating to my own bed, my heart a frantic, caged bird against my ribs. I told myself I was just being a good friend. It was what anyone would do. But I knew, in the honest, silent hours of the night, that it was more than that. I was letting him in, not just into my apartment, but into the carefully guarded spaces of my life, and I was terrified of how much I wanted him to stay. The ritual, as I came to think of it, established itself without any formal discussion. It was a creature born of mutual, unspoken need. His need for escape and my need for his proximity. It always started the same way. A text around dinner time. "You home?" Followed by his arrival, bringing with him the scent of the crisp autumn air and the weight of his unspoken sadness. We would eat, often in comfortable silence, and then migrate to the living room. We'd put on a movie, something mindless and distracting. He would take the couch, and I would take the armchair. For the first week, that was the extent of it. A carefully maintained distance, a physical representation of the line we both knew existed between us. But grief is a relentless tide, and it erodes even the most clearly drawn boundaries. The first time he moved closer felt like a seismic event. He had been sprawled on the couch, and I was on the floor, leaning against its edge, sorting through a box of old negatives. He shifted, a restless movement, and then his foot, clad in a thick wool sock, came to rest against my back. It was a simple, unconscious act of seeking contact, of grounding himself. But for me, it was everything. My entire body went rigid. I could feel the slight pressure, the warmth seeping through my t-shirt. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. I just stayed there, a living statue, until he finally shifted away, oblivious to the storm he had just unleashed inside me. After that, the small touches became more frequent. An arm slung over the back of the couch, his fingers occasionally brushing my hair. A leg stretched out, his ankle resting against mine. Each instance was a test, a question asked without words. And my stillness, my silent acceptance, was the answer. I was an open door, and he was slowly, cautiously, stepping through it. The true turning point came about a month after the breakup. He was having a particularly bad day. He'd had to see Sarah to exchange the last of their things, a brutal, final severing of their shared life. He arrived at my apartment looking hollowed out, his usual energy completely extinguished. That night, as we sat in front of the television, the blue light flickering across his pale face, he didn't just move closer. He lay down, his body a long, tense line on the cushions, and without a word, he placed his head in my lap. Time stopped. The air in the room became thick, heavy, charged with a meaning I was too terrified to decipher. I could feel the weight of his skull, the soft texture of his hair against my jeans, the warmth of him a searing brand on my thighs. My hands, which had been resting on my knees, were now trapped in an impossible position. What was I supposed to do? Touch him? Push him away? I did neither. I remained perfectly still, my body turning to stone, my heart hammering a frantic, deafening rhythm against my ribs. He let out a long, shuddering sigh, a sound of such profound weariness that it broke my heart. And then his body seemed to melt into mine, the tension draining out of him as he finally gave in to his exhaustion. He was asleep within minutes. And I sat there, pinned beneath the weight of my best friend, the man I loved, and I felt a sense of peace so profound and so terrifying that it almost made me weep. It was a feeling of coming home to a place I'd never been before. I stayed like that for hours, long after the movie had ended and the screen had gone black, my muscles screaming in protest, unwilling to move, unwilling to break the spell. That night, a new clause was written into our unspoken contract. This was allowed now. This was part of our new normal. From then on, it became our default position. Movie nights were no longer about the movie. They were about this. He would arrive, we would eat, and then he would settle on the couch and I would sit at his end, and he would lay his head in my lap as if it were the most natural thing in the world. My initial paralysis gave way to a tentative, secret kind of joy. I allowed myself small freedoms. I would rest my hand on his back, feeling the slow, steady rise and fall of his breathing. Sometimes my fingers would drift to his hair, and I would gently, so gently, trace patterns through the soft strands, my touch as light as a moth's wing. He never once acknowledged it. He would just sigh in his sleep, a soft sound of contentment, and press closer. I lived for those moments. They were my nourishment, the secret sustenance that got me through the lonely daylight hours. I became a scholar of his sleep, an expert in the geography of his unconsciousness. I learned that a slight furrow in his brow meant he was dreaming of swimming, his muscles twitching with the memory of the water. I learned that when he was truly, deeply at peace, his hand would unclench, his fingers resting softly against my leg. I was living a double life. In one, I was the stoic, supportive friend, providing a safe harbor for a friend in need. In the other, I was a man deeply, hopelessly in love, stealing moments of intimacy that weren't truly mine. The anxiety was a constant companion. Every night I would analyze his behavior, searching for clues, for any sign that this meant to him what it meant to me. Was he just using me for comfort? Was I just a warm body, a convenient and non-threatening presence? Or was it possible, just possible, that something else was growing in the quiet space between us? He started talking more about Sarah, not with the raw pain of the early days, but with a kind of reflective sadness. He spoke of their relationship as a thing of the past, a chapter that was definitively closed. He never mentioned dating, never talked about other people. His world seemed to have shrunk, for the time being, to two places, the pool and my apartment. He once mumbled something in his sleep, his voice thick and slurred. He'd said my name. Just Leo. It was a simple, unconscious utterance, but it echoed in my silent apartment like a gunshot. I had frozen, my hand hovering over his hair, my breath caught in my throat. Had he woken up? But his breathing had remained deep and even. He was still lost to the world. But he was dreaming of me. Or maybe I was just a character in the background of his dream. It was impossible to know, and the ambiguity was killing me. I started to feel like a photographer in his own darkroom, watching an image slowly emerge in the developing tray. The outlines were there, the shapes were forming, but the details remained submerged, tantalizingly out of reach. I was terrified of exposing it to the light too soon, of fixing the image before it was fully formed, leaving it pale and underdeveloped forever. But I was also terrified of leaving it in the chemical bath for too long, of letting it overdevelop until it became a black, unrecognizable mess. This limbo was unsustainable. The nightly ritual, which had once been a source of quiet joy, began to feel like a tightrope walk over a canyon. The comfort was still there, but it was now laced with a desperate, painful yearning. I wanted more. I wanted to be able to touch him when he was awake. I wanted to know what he was thinking when he looked at me. I wanted to hear him say my name when his eyes were open. I was an addict, and the small doses of intimacy he unknowingly provided were no longer enough. They only served to deepen my craving. The silence in the room, once a comfortable blanket, now felt charged, thick with all the things we weren't saying. I knew something had to break. I just didn't know if I would be the one to break it. The crossing happened on a Thursday. It was different from the start. There was a tension in the air, a strange, nervous energy that hadn't been there before. He was quiet during dinner, his gaze distant. He seemed agitated, restless. When we settled in the living room, he didn't immediately lie down. He sat at the far end of the couch, his knee bouncing, a coiled spring of nervous energy. The movie we put on was one of my favorites, a quiet, black and white film about loneliness and connection in a big city. For the first hour, he barely seemed to register it. He just stared at the screen, his jaw tight. I stayed in my armchair, feeling the distance between us like a physical ache. The ritual was broken. The thought sent a spike of panic through me. This is it, I thought. He's better now. He doesn't need this anymore. He's going to say thank you, and he's going to go back to his own life. And I will be left here, in the silence, with the ghost of his warmth in my lap. The grief was so sudden, so absolute. It felt like I was suffocating. Then he spoke. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper, and it made me jump. Leo. I looked at him. He had turned to face me, the flickering light from the television casting shifting shadows across his face. His expression was one I had never seen before. It was uncertain, vulnerable, and deeply serious. Yeah, I managed, my voice sounding tight and strange to my own ears. He swallowed, his gaze dropping to his hands, which he was twisting in his lap. Can I ask you something stupid? My heart began to pound, a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. This was it, the moment of truth, the point where the photograph is either pulled from the developer or left to turn black. There are no stupid questions, Julian, I said, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. He took a deep breath, and when he looked up at me again, his eyes were shining with an emotion I couldn't name. It looked like fear. It looked like hope. It looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, trying to decide whether to jump. This, he said, gesturing vaguely at the space between us, at the couch, at the whole room. Us. Me being here all the time. Is this okay with you? The question hung in the air, so simple and yet so impossibly complex. It was an offering, a chance for me to end it, to give him an out. I could have said it was getting to be too much. I could have made an excuse. I could have gently nudged him back toward his own life. It would have been the safe thing to do, the thing that would have preserved our friendship, even if it meant my own quiet heartbreak. But I was so tired of being safe. I was tired of living in the shadows of what I really felt. It's more than okay, Julian, I said, and my voice was steadier now, infused with a terrifying clarity. I like you being here. A flicker of relief passed over his face, so quick I might have imagined it. He nodded slowly, processing my words. The silence stretched again, but this time it was different. It wasn't empty. It was full. It was waiting. He finally moved, shifting across the couch until he was sitting in the middle, much closer to me now. He still wasn't looking at me, but at the grain of the wooden floorboards. Okay, he whispered, mostly to himself. Okay. He took another breath, as if steeling himself. And then he said the words that changed everything. Would it be weird if I kissed you? The world tilted on its axis. The sound from the television faded to a dull murmur. My entire universe narrowed to his face, to the nervous way he was biting his lip, to the question hanging in the space between us like a fragile, perfect soap bubble. My mind raced, a chaotic scramble of fear and elation. Fear that this was a mistake, a moment of grief-fueled confusion on his part that we would both regret. Elation that the thing I had only ever dared to dream about was being offered to me, freely and with a terrifying vulnerability. I could see the panic in his eyes, the way he was already starting to retreat, to take it back. He started to stammer. Forget it, that was dumb. I'm sorry, I just know, I said, the word cutting through his panicked retraction. It was quiet, but it was absolute. He stopped talking, his eyes locking with mine. It wouldn't be weird. And then, he closed the remaining distance. It wasn't a passionate, movie-style kiss. It was hesitant, tentative, a question being asked in a language beyond words. His lips were soft, uncertain, and they barely brushed against mine before he started to pull back, as if expecting to be rejected. In that moment, all my fear, all my years of patient, silent waiting, coalesced into a single, decisive action. I leaned forward, my hand coming up to cup the back of his neck, my fingers tangling in his soft hair, and I kissed him back. I kissed him with all the quiet yearning I had stored up for years. It was a kiss that tasted of salt and relief and the terrifying, beautiful beginning of something new. It was gentle. It was reverent. It was the most honest conversation we had ever had. When we finally broke apart, we just stayed there, our foreheads resting against each other, our breath mingling in the small space between us. The movie played on, forgotten. The only thing that mattered was the solid, real presence of him, the feeling of his skin under my fingertips, and the quiet, earth-shattering truth that had finally been spoken into existence. The morning after was a study in silence. But it was a different kind of silence, a brittle, anxious one that felt 1,000 times worse than the comfortable quiet we had cultivated. I woke up alone in my bed, which wasn't unusual, but the apartment felt different. It felt empty. A quick glance into the living room confirmed my fear. The blanket I had left on the couch was folded neatly, a perfect, impersonal square. Julian was gone. There was no note. Just a cold mug with the dregs of last night's tea on the coffee table and the crushing weight of his absence. My heart, which had felt so full and light just hours before, plummeted into a cold, dark place in my stomach. I had been a fool. I had misinterpreted everything. It had been a mistake, a moment of weakness for him, and now the harsh light of day had brought with it regret and shame. I spent the day in a fog of self-recrimination, replaying every second of the night before, searching for the moment I got it all wrong. The kiss had felt so real, so mutual, but his disappearance felt even realer. Late in the afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was him. My hands were shaking as I read the text. Hey, sorry I took off this morning. Last night, I was a mess. Shouldn't have happened. Each word was a tiny, sharp shard of glass embedding itself in my chest. A mess. Shouldn't have happened. He had reduced the most significant moment of my life to a regrettable mistake, a symptom of his emotional turmoil. The pain was so sharp, so visceral, it almost took my breath away. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw my phone against the wall. But instead, I just sank onto my armchair, the one where I had watched him sleep for so many nights, and felt a profound, hollow emptiness settle over me. I had risked everything. I had allowed myself to hope, and in the end, I had lost not only the possibility of a future, but the comfort of the past as well. I hadn't just lost a potential lover. I had lost my best friend. The ritual was over. The door was closed, and I was alone on the other side. I didn't reply to his text. What could I say? It's okay. It wasn't okay. Don't worry about it. I was worried sick. Any response felt like a lie, like I was letting him off the hook for shattering me into a million pieces. So I said nothing. The silence stretched for 2 agonizing days. 2 days where I jumped every time my phone made a sound. 2 days where I stared at the couch as if it were a crime scene, the place where all my hopes had died. I didn't edit photos. I didn't leave the apartment. I just existed in the suffocating quiet, mourning a relationship that had only ever truly existed in my own head. On the third day, I woke up and the grief had curdled into something else. Anger. Not a fiery, destructive anger, but a cold, quiet rage. I was angry at him for his cowardice, for his inability to face what he had done. But mostly, I was angry at myself for letting him have that much power over me, for being so passive in my own life story. I had spent years as the quiet observer, the silent archivist. It was time to speak. I found him at the pool. It was late, and the cavernous space was mostly empty, the air thick with the smell of chlorine and echoing with the rhythmic slap of water. He was in the far lane, cutting through the water with a desperate, punishing intensity, his arms churning, his face a mask of grim determination. He was trying to outswim his feelings, to exhaust the confusion out of his body. I sat on the cold bleachers and waited. I watched him swim lap after punishing lap until his movements became ragged, his energy spent. Finally, he hauled himself out of the water, his chest heaving, and stood dripping at the edge of the pool, his back to me. He hadn't seen me yet. I took a breath, the chlorinated air stinging my lungs, and called his name. Julian. His whole body went rigid. He turned slowly, his face a mixture of shock and dread when he saw me. Water streamed from his hair, running in rivulets down his face, making it impossible to tell if any of it was tears. He looked like a cornered animal. I walked down from the bleachers and stopped a few feet from him, maintaining a careful distance. I didn't want to crowd him. I just wanted to be heard. "We need to talk," I said, my voice calmer than I felt. "Leo," he started, his voice rough. "I already said I was sorry." "It was a mistake, was it?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Was it a mistake when you put your head in my lap for the first time? Was it a mistake every single night for the past 2 months that you chose my couch over your own bed? Were all of those things just you being a mess?" Each question was a carefully aimed arrow, and I could see them landing, see him flinch. He had the grace to look ashamed. He wouldn't meet my eyes, staring instead at a point on the tiled floor between us. "You don't get to do that, Julian," I continued, the cold anger giving my words a hard edge. "You don't get to use my apartment and my friendship as your personal sanctuary, to take all the comfort you need, to initiate something real, and then run away and call it a mistake because you're scared. You don't have to want me back. You don't have to feel anything you don't feel. But you have to be honest. With me, and with yourself. I deserve that much. Our friendship deserved that much." The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the gentle lapping of the water in the pool. He finally looked up at me, and his eyes were filled with a raw, agonizing conflict. The confident athlete was gone, replaced by a lost and terrified man. "I don't know what I'm doing, Leo," he finally whispered, his voice cracking. I've never. This has never happened to me before." He ran a hand through his wet hair, his movements agitated. "My whole life has been a straight line. School, swimming, Sarah. It all made sense. It was all planned out. And then, everything fell apart. And the only place that felt safe, the only place that felt quiet enough for me to breathe, was with you." He took a hesitant step closer, his eyes pleading with me to understand. "It wasn't a mistake," he admitted, the words sounding like they were being torn from him. "Lying in your lap. It was the only time my head was quiet. The only time I felt peaceful. And I started to need it. I started to need you. And that scared the hell out of me. Because it felt better than anything I'd ever felt with her. It felt more real." He gestured helplessly with his hands. "I wasn't looking for anything. I wasn't looking for love. I was just trying to survive. And then I kissed you. And it was like I'd been holding my breath my whole life, and I could finally exhale. And the first thing I felt wasn't happiness. It was terror. Because I don't know how to be this person. I don't know what this means." His confession, raw and broken and honest, washed away all of my anger. All that was left was a deep, aching empathy for his confusion, for his fear. He wasn't running from me. He was running from himself. I closed the remaining distance between us, and, without thinking, I reached out, and put my hands on his wet, trembling shoulders. He flinched at my touch, but didn't pull away. "So we figure it out?" I said softly. "Together. You don't have to have all the answers right now, Julian. You have to stop running." A single tear escaped his eye, tracing a path through the droplets of pool water on his cheek. He nodded, a small, jerky movement. And then he leaned forward and collapsed against me, his arms wrapping around my waist, his face buried in the crook of my neck. I held him, my shirt instantly soaked with cold, chlorinated water, and for the first time in 3 days, I felt like I could breathe again. We weren't fixed. We weren't even okay. But we were finally being honest. And it was a start. The aftermath of our confrontation at the pool was not a sudden, magical resolution. It was quiet, tentative, and achingly slow. It was like learning a new language together, one where every word had to be carefully chosen and every silence was freighted with meaning. He didn't come back to my apartment that night. We agreed he needed space, real space, to process, to untangle the knots of fear and confusion in his own head without the immediate, overwhelming influence of my presence. We texted short, simple messages that were nonetheless monumental in their honesty. "Thinking of you. Hope practice went well. I'm scared. Me too." Each message was a small, fragile brick we were laying for a new foundation, one built not on unspoken assumptions, but on acknowledged vulnerability. He came over a week later. He knocked on the door, a sound that felt both familiar and entirely new. When I opened it, he was just standing there, his hands shoved in his pockets, looking nervous and younger than I had ever seen him. He wasn't carrying a bag of takeout or a movie. He was just carrying himself. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice quiet, as if he were asking for permission to enter a sacred space. I just nodded and stepped aside. He walked into the living room and stood in the center, looking at the couch. It was no longer a neutral piece of furniture. It was a monument to our past, to our unspoken ritual, and now, to our crisis. The air was thick with the memory of it all. "I'm sorry, Leo," he said, finally turning to face me. "For running. For hurting you. You were the one person who was there for me, and I panicked. I was so afraid of what it meant, of what people would think, of what I was supposed to be, that I didn't stop to think about what I actually felt. And what I feel," he paused, taking a deep, shaky breath, "is that my life makes more sense when you're in it. A lot more sense." We didn't sit on the couch that night. We sat at my small kitchen table, a space for conversation, not for silent, ambiguous comfort. And we talked. We talked for hours. He told me about the pressure he'd always felt to fit into a certain mold, the star athlete, the perfect son, the straight boyfriend. He talked about how his relationship with Sarah had been comfortable and expected, but how it had lacked the profound sense of being truly seen that he felt with me. I, in turn, told him about my years of silent affection, about the box of photographs under my bed, about the exquisite agony of having him so close and yet so far away. I laid my own vulnerability bare, showing him the hidden architecture of my heart. It was terrifying and liberating all at once. There were no more secrets between us. There was only the quiet, fragile, and beautiful truth. The new normal began to take shape, not as a sudden shift, but as a series of small, intentional choices. The next time he came over, he brought groceries. "I thought I could cook for you," he said, a shy smile playing on his lips. The meal was simple, slightly burnt, and absolutely perfect. We ate at the kitchen table again, and afterwards, when we migrated to the living room, a moment of tension hung in the air. The couch beckoned, a silent invitation to fall back into old patterns. I saw him glance at it, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Instead of moving towards it, I held out my hand. "Come on," I said softly. "Let me show you something." I led him into my darkroom, a space he had seen but never truly been invited into. I turned on the safe light, casting the small room in a deep, ruby-red glow, and I opened the box from under my bed. One by one, I showed him the prints. Julian, asleep in the afternoon sun. Julian, laughing at something I'd said, his head thrown back. Julian, lost in thought, staring out the window. It was my secret history of him, my silent love story told in silver and light. He looked at each photograph with a kind of reverent awe, his fingers tracing the edges of the paper. He didn't say anything for a long time. When he finally looked up at me, his eyes were shining in the dim red light. "This is how you see me?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. I just nodded. "All this time," he whispered, shaking his head in wonder. "You saw all this." He reached out, his hand cupping my jaw, his thumb gently stroking my cheek. "I want to be the man you see in these pictures," he said. And in the warm, red darkness of my most private space, he leaned in and kissed me. This time, there was no hesitation, no uncertainty. It was a kiss of acceptance, of understanding. It was a promise. Our relationship was rebuilt, not on the ambiguous comfort of a couch, but on the solid ground of intentional intimacy. He started staying the night, but now he slept in my bed, his body curled around mine, his arm thrown protectively over my chest. The first time we woke up together, the morning light filtering through the blinds, was a revelation. There was no panicked escape, no silent disappearance. There was just the simple, profound peace of his presence. He blinked his eyes open, a slow smile spreading across his face as he saw me watching him. "Morning," he'd mumbled, his voice rough with sleep, and he'd leaned in to kiss me. A soft, sleepy kiss that tasted of a future I had never let myself believe in. The small moments of domesticity became our new ritual. Making coffee together in the morning, his larger frame navigating my small kitchen with a newfound familiarity. The quiet evenings spent reading in the same room, his foot occasionally nudging mine in a silent, "I'm here." It was a quiet, unassuming kind of love, built not on grand gestures, but on the steady accumulation of shared, ordinary moments. One evening, months later, we were on the couch. We were just watching a movie, sitting side by side, my head resting on his shoulder, his arm wrapped securely around me. It was so easy, so natural, that it took me a moment to realize the significance of it. We had reclaimed the space. It was no longer a place of yearning and ambiguity, but a place of simple, established comfort. He must have sensed my thoughts, because he tightened his arm around me and pressed a kiss to the top of my head. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured against my hair. I smiled, a real, unburdened smile. "Just how far we've come," I said. "From this couch," he chuckled, a low, warm sound that vibrated through his chest and into mine. "Yeah," he said. "This couch has seen a lot." He tilted my chin up, his gaze soft and full of a love that still, sometimes, took my breath away. "Thank you," he said, his voice serious, "for not giving up on me, for being patient enough to let me find my way here." I didn't need to answer. He knew. He could see it in my eyes. The journey had been long and fraught with a quiet kind of pain, but every moment of uncertainty, every second of fearful waiting, had led us here, to this quiet, unshakable peace, to this profound sense of rightness. We had found our way out of the shadows and into a gentle, steady light of our own making. We learn, I think, that a home is not always a place you find, but often a sanctuary you build. It is not constructed from wood and nails, but from shared silences, from moments of terrifying vulnerability, and from the slow, patient laying of one honest brick upon another. Julian and I had been two separate structures, weathered by our own private storms. He was looking for a temporary shelter, and I was a house with a locked door, too afraid to let anyone see the quiet, lonely rooms inside. But his persistent, unconscious need became the key, and my eventual, desperate courage was the hand that finally turned it. We didn't fall in love. We built it. We built it on a foundation of friendship, mortared it with late-night confessions and hesitant touches, and finally, we learned to live inside it, to trust its walls. And in the beautiful, honest silence we had learned to create together, in the comfortable space between his breath and mine, we began to heal. We found our home,